Bishops, speed demons of the diagonals. While knights slowly but surely hop and leap to whatever areas of the board they wish to go, bishops, also known in various insane circles as bellhops, bees, and wily angle sliders. Two bishops are, on occasion, also referred to as two Jans, or oddly, two rabbis. I've never heard of any of these terms describing bishops. Bishops can roar across the length of the board in a single move. It lives for speed, and this little Formula 1 race car makes anything that dares step onto its diagonal potential roadkill. This means that if those diagonals aren't blocked, the bishop can be a fierce and highly prized piece. Bishops have historically been viewed as being either good, the player's center pawn, so bishops, when they're good, the player's center pawns are on the opposite color of the bishop, so the bishop isn't restricted by its own pawns when it's good, or the bishop can be bad when the pawns in the center are on the same color as the bishop. However, I no longer like these terms, deeming them anti-intuitive and at times confusing. For example, bad bishops can often be active, and as a result, very strong. Or bad bishops can also be critically useful defenders. Thus in this book, we'll refer to bishops as active, useful, or tall pawns. Some notes. A bishop is considered active if it is outside the pawn chain and / or enjoying life on a reasonably clutter-free diagonal. Next point. A bishop is considered useful if it's doing an important defensive or dynamic task. Such a defensive bishop can be ugly to look at, but its absence would cause your position to undergo serious difficulties. A bishop is said to be a tall pawn if it is not serving a useful function and is trapped behind its pawns, thus making it inactive. This kind of bishop takes on the persona of an overgrown pawn that sadly can't turn into a queen if it reaches the end of the board. Let's take a deeper look at each of these bishop types. So there's active bishops, useful bishops, and tall pawns. The active bishop. Give a bishop a diagonal that's uncluttered by soda cans, pens, its own pawns, or a solid / well-defended wall of enemy pawns. Pieces aren't clutter, and we'll consider it to be active. So let me just reread that sentence without the jokes. Give a bishop a diagonal that's not cluttered by pawns, or even a solid wall of enemy pawns, and it is considered to be active. This doesn't mean that an active bishop can single-handedly bring down the enemy position, or that it will even successfully mesh with the rest of its army. That's up to you and your skills at getting all your bits to work together for a particular goal. But an active bishop can dash from one sector to another in a flash, so they always need to be respected. Black to move. Black to move. White has two active bishops here. His c4 bishop eyes the c4 bishop eyes the f1 a6 diagonal, this one here, and the a2 g8 diagonals, while his other bishop controls the c1 to h6 line. Black's light squared bishop, this one, is also active since it eyes the c8 to h3 diagonal. The d7 knight isn't considered clutter because it can move out of the bishop's way whenever it wishes to. However, Black's e7 bishop isn't particularly active because it's blocked by the d6 pawn here. Of course, it does keep an eye on the shorter d8 to h4 diagonal, and it also gives d6 a solid support, so it's not close to being a tall pawn. In fact, this bishop can easily become something special after a d6 to d5 pawn push frees the f8 to a3 diagonal here. Or it can assume diagonal supremacy if white ever captures on e5 with d takes e5, since recapturing by black with d takes e5 would unlock its potential. This shows us that a bishop can become active at the drop of a hat, and that innocent-looking pawn exchanges, like d takes e5, can easily turn a dormant enemy piece into an active one. Why are all the bishops in the diagram at least reasonably active? Because the center is fluid and can open up if further pawns are exchanged. However, a couple poor moves can change all this. c5, question mark. I'm sure the e7 bishop didn't appreciate this move. This unfortunate advance also turns d5 into a gaping hole. d5, question mark. White also seems to be oblivious to the needs of his minor pieces. With one push of the pawn, the d5 hole has been plugged and the c4 bishop is blocked. Talk about self-defeating. Instead, white could have played d takes e5, knight takes, d takes, queen e2. And this would leave black with that hole on d5 while the e7 bishop's potential has greatly been reduced. Also note that white's light-squared bishop is a real fire breather on the a2 to g8 diagonal. In the position from the earlier diagram, everyone started out with nice bishops, but more often than not you'll find that your bishop isn't setting the board on fire. What do you do then? Being a fan of The Wizard of Oz, I tried closing my eyes, clicking my Birkenstocks together and saying, "There's nothing like an active bishop. There's nothing like an active bishop." Sadly, it didn't have the desired effect. When I opened my eyes, the bishop was still sitting there doing nothing. Clearly, inactive bishops will remain that way unless you do something about it. In other words, if you possess a lazy bishop that is sitting around daydreaming, you'll have to find a way to put the thing to work. This mix of bishop awareness, also known as knowledge, and willpower can be quite effective. Here are some rules. Rule: bishops are usually strongest in open positions. The fewer pawns in the way of the bishop, the greater its scope. Rule: every time you move a pawn, check to see how it affects the activity of your bishops. Obviously, turning an open position into a closed one will have a serious effect on these pieces, so train yourself to always take the health and care of your bishops into account.